On March 12, 2022, the quiet suburban neighborhood of Oakwood Heights in Dearborn, Michigan, awoke to the sound of sirens. It was 7:42 a.m. on a Saturday when emergency services received a frantic call from a teenage boy. The dispatcher would later describe it as one of the most chilling calls she had ever handled. "My father shot my mother. Please hurry, I think she's dying." These were the words of 14-year-old Elias Kader Blackwood, the eldest son of Nasir Kader and Rachel Blackwood. Within minutes, police units surrounded the two-story brick home on Maple Street, a property that had never before drawn attention in this tight-knit community known for its large Arab-American population. Officer Samantha Torres was first to arrive at the scene. Through the front window, she observed a man sitting motionless on the living room couch, a handgun placed on the coffee table in front of him. 3 children huddled together on the staircase, the oldest protectively embracing the younger 2. And on the floor, partially visible from Torres's vantage point, lay the body of a woman in a growing pool of blood. Suspect appears calm, weapon in plain sight, victim down, 3 minors present, Torres reported into her radio before backup arrived. Following protocol for an active shooter situation, officers entered the home with tactical precision. They found 42-year-old Nasir Kader offering no resistance as they secured the weapon, a legally registered 9mm Glock, and placed him in handcuffs. "I did what had to be done," witnesses reported, hearing Kader say as officers led him to the patrol car. His demeanor was described as eerily composed, his eyes vacant as he looked back at the house one final time. Inside, paramedics confirmed what the children already knew. Rachel Blackwood, 38, a respected professor of comparative literature at Wayne State University, was pronounced dead at the scene. The medical examiner would later confirm she had sustained 3 gunshot wounds to the chest and abdomen, fired at close range, while she stood in the open area between the kitchen and living room. She was still wearing pajamas, suggesting the violence erupted early in the morning, possibly during breakfast preparation. The 3 children, Elias, 12-year-old Layla, and 9-year-old Adam, were immediately removed from the scene by child services specialists. Preliminary interviews revealed they had witnessed the entire incident, having been called downstairs by their father moments before he pulled the trigger. "He wanted us to see," Elias would later tell investigators, his voice barely audible during the recorded interview. "He said we needed to understand what happens to traitors." As news of the shooting spread through Dearborn, community members gathered outside the police cordon. The neighborhood, known for its cultural diversity, but particularly its strong Arab-American presence, seemed collectively stunned. Many knew the family. Nasir, an Egyptian-born engineering consultant who had lived in the United States for 20 years, and Rachel, a 4th-generation American who had met her husband while both were graduate students at the University of Michigan. Detective Marcus Reed, a 15-year veteran of the Dearborn Police Department, with extensive experience in domestic violence cases, was assigned as lead investigator. His first step was securing a search warrant for the family home, which revealed a household in transition. In the master bedroom closet, investigators found packed suitcases belonging to Rachel. In Nasir's home office, they discovered torn photographs and a file folder containing divorce papers filed by Rachel 3 weeks earlier. The petition had been served to Nasir just 5 days before the shooting. What initially appeared to be a straightforward case of domestic violence, triggered by an impending divorce, soon revealed layers of complexity. On Nasir's computer, forensic investigators recovered recently viewed websites related to interfaith marriages and apostasy in Islam. Even more telling was an email draft never sent, addressed to Nasir's parents in Cairo. "She has deceived us all these years. The children must not be raised by someone who has hidden her true self." The most significant discovery came when detectives found a leather-bound journal hidden between the mattress and box spring on Rachel's side of the bed. The most recent entry, dated just 2 days before the murder, contained a passage that would become central to understanding the case. "I can no longer deny who I am. My grandmother's stories, the traditions I was never allowed to embrace, they are part of me. I've made an appointment with Rabbi Goldstein next week. The children deserve to know their heritage, even if it means Nasir will never forgive me. Some truths cannot remain buried forever." This journal entry prompted investigators to look more deeply into Rachel Blackwood's background. While her professional biography at the university described her as coming from a non-religious Midwestern family, interviews with her estranged relatives in Chicago painted a different picture. Rachel Blackwood, born Rachel Silverman, was the granddaughter of Holocaust survivors who had changed their name upon arriving in America. Rachel had apparently disconnected from her Jewish heritage when she married Nasir in 2007, a decision her family had never fully accepted. As Detective Reed compiled the timeline of events, a disturbing pattern emerged. Cell phone records showed that 2 days before the murder, Nasir had received a text message from a mutual friend expressing concern about Rachel's meeting with a local rabbi. Bank statements revealed that on the day after receiving this message, Nasir had withdrawn $20,000 from their joint savings account and transferred it to an overseas account in his name only. Security footage from a local gun range showed Nasir practicing with his firearm the afternoon before the murder, a routine he hadn't followed in over a year, according to the range's check-in records. Most damning was the discovery of a browser history showing searches for punishment for lying about religion in marriage and custody rights for fathers when mother abandons faith. The initial shock that rippled through the community soon gave way to divided opinions. Some neighbors expressed disbelief, describing Nasir as a devoted family man who regularly attended community events and coached his son's soccer team. Others, primarily those closer to Rachel, spoke of noticing changes in her demeanor over the past year. She had become more withdrawn, had begun wearing higher-necked clothing, and had stopped attending social gatherings where her husband would be present. As the first 48 hours of the investigation concluded, police had established what they believed to be a clear motive. Nasir Khadr had murdered his wife, not simply because she wanted to end their marriage, but because he had discovered she was Jewish and feared she would reconnect with her heritage and influence their children. The premeditated nature of the crime was evident in his actions, leading up to that fateful Saturday morning. What no one could yet explain was why Rachel had kept her background hidden for so long, only to reveal it at this particular moment in their marriage. And perhaps more importantly, what had triggered Nasir's discovery of her true identity after 15 years together? The answers would lie in the complicated history of a relationship that had begun with love, but ended in the most tragic expression of hatred, a story that would force an entire community to confront uncomfortable truths about religious intolerance hiding beneath the veneer of cultural assimilation. As Nasir Khadr was formally charged with first-degree murder, investigators were only beginning to unravel the complex web of secrets and resentments that had culminated in Rachel Blackwood's death. Little did they know that the case would soon reveal connections to events and people far beyond the borders of their Michigan suburb, connections that would expose a carefully constructed facade maintained not just by the accused, but by the victim herself. As investigators delved deeper into the lives of Nasir Khadr and Rachel Blackwood, they began piecing together a relationship marked by cultural compromises and hidden tensions. Their story began in 2004 at the University of Michigan, where both were pursuing graduate degrees, Nasir in structural engineering and Rachel in comparative literature, with a focus on Middle Eastern texts. Professor Emeritus Daniel Harrington, who supervised Rachel's master's thesis, recalled their early relationship. Rachel was brilliant, particularly interested in cross-cultural narratives. She was drawn to Nasir's stories about growing up in Cairo. There was an intellectual connection first. She was fascinated by his perspective on texts she had only approached academically. University records and interviews with former classmates revealed that Rachel and Nasir met during an interdisciplinary symposium on cultural exchange. What began as academic discussions over coffee evolved into a romance that many in their social circle described as passionate, but sometimes turbulent. Rachel's roommate from that period, Vanessa Mitchell, told investigators that Rachel had been transparent about the challenges they faced. She knew his family expected him to return to Egypt and marry someone from their community, Mitchell stated. Rachel was determined to prove she could bridge their differences. She started learning Arabic, studied Islamic traditions. She wanted to show him and his family that love could transcend cultural boundaries. Photographs from this period showed a young couple seemingly embracing both worlds, attending campus multicultural events, hosting dinner parties that featured both Middle Eastern and American cuisines. Yet former friends noticed that Rachel rarely discussed her own background in detail, describing her family simply as non-practicing Midwesterners. The turning point came in 2006 when Nasir received a job offer from a prestigious engineering firm in Dearborn. Instead of returning to Egypt as his family had expected, he proposed to Rachel, suggesting they build a life together in Michigan's Arab-American enclave. Their wedding in June 2007 was a small civil ceremony with few family members present. Notably absent were Rachel's parents and grandparents, an absence explained away as a family disagreement about the interfaith marriage. Financial records showed that following the wedding, Rachel legally changed her name from Silverman to Blackwood, a maternal family name from several generations back. Investigators discovered that this name change occurred before any marriage documentation was filed, effectively concealing her Jewish surname from official records connecting her to Nasir. Their move to Dearborn represented a significant compromise. Rather than creating a multicultural household that honored both backgrounds, they appeared to immerse themselves fully in the Arab-American community. Nasir quickly established himself professionally, joining the local mosque and becoming active in community organizations. Rachel took a teaching position at Wayne State University, but maintained a lower profile socially. Interviews with neighbors on Maple Street painted a picture of a family that appeared well integrated into the community. The Qaeda Blackwood children attended the local public school, but also participated in weekend Arabic classes. During Ramadan, the family was observed following traditional practices. During other significant holidays, they often traveled, telling neighbors they were visiting Rachel's family, though credit card records would later reveal these trips were actually to various vacation destinations, not to Chicago where her family resided. A former colleague of Rachel's at Wayne State, Dr. Layla Mahmood, provided crucial insights into Rachel's professional life. She was respected in her field, published regularly on comparative literature, but she kept her personal and professional lives completely separate. In 10 years of friendship, she never once invited me to her home. I met Nasir only at university functions, where he was always charming but somewhat controlling of their interactions. As their children grew, subtle tensions became more apparent. School records showed that when registering the children, Rachel had listed their religion as Muslim, but left her own religious affiliation blank. Teachers noted that Nasir attended every parent-teacher conference and made decisions regarding the children's education and activities, while Rachel often deferred to him in public settings. The first documented indication of serious marital problems came in 2020, coinciding with the pandemic lockdowns. Neighbors reported overhearing arguments through open windows during the summer months. That September, police were called to the residence for a welfare check after a concerned call from Elias's teacher, who had noticed the boy seemed distressed during virtual classes. No report was filed, as both parents assured officers everything was fine, a normal family disagreement amplified by lockdown stress. Bank records revealed a significant shift around this time. Rachel opened a separate bank account and began transferring small amounts from her university salary into it. Internet search histories from her laptop showed inquiries about financial independence after long marriage and how to reconnect with estranged family. The investigation uncovered a pivotal moment in December 2021, when Rachel traveled alone to Chicago for what she told Nasir was an academic conference. Hotel receipts and witness statements confirmed she actually spent 3 days with her elderly parents and met with her grandmother's rabbi. Upon her return, neighbors observed increased tension in the household, with Rachel spending more time away from home and Nasir becoming more visibly controlling of the children's activities. By January 2022, Rachel had consulted a divorce attorney specializing in cross-cultural marriages. The initial consultation notes, obtained through a court order, included Rachel's concerns about potential religious and cultural complications in custody arrangements. She specifically mentioned wanting the children to understand all parts of their heritage, but feared Nasir's reaction to her recent reconnection with family traditions. Email exchanges between Rachel and her sister in Chicago, recovered from her password-protected account, revealed her growing determination to reclaim her identity. "I've lived as someone else for 15 years, she wrote 6 weeks before her death. The children deserve to know their full history, both Nasir's and mine. If he cannot accept this part of me, then we cannot remain together. I won't erase myself any longer." What Rachel could not have known was that her careful steps toward reclaiming her identity had not gone unnoticed. Digital forensics revealed that in February 2022, Nasir had installed spyware on the family computer, giving him access to Rachel's emails and search history. The timing aligned perfectly with his increasingly suspicious behavior, noted by colleagues and neighbors. The final thread connecting their past to the tragedy came from an unexpected source. Rabbi David Goldstein of Temple Beth Shalom in nearby Southfield confirmed to investigators that Rachel had reached out to discuss formally returning to Judaism. More significantly, she had inquired about the possibility of introducing her children to Jewish traditions and history, particularly the story of their great-grandparents who had survived Auschwitz before immigrating to America. Their scheduled meeting, set for March 15, 2022, would never take place. 3 days before that appointment, Nasir Khader ended the life of the woman who had spent 15 years hiding a fundamental part of her identity to preserve their marriage, only to decide that the truth could no longer remain buried. As investigators compiled these details, the case transformed from a seemingly straightforward domestic homicide into something more complex, a tragedy born from cultural deception, religious intolerance, and the devastating consequences of secrets kept too long. But even as the outlines of motive became clearer, crucial questions remained about what had triggered Nasir's final, fatal act of violence. The answers would emerge from the most heartbreaking source imaginable, the testimony of the children who had witnessed everything. The traumatized faces of the Khader Blackwood children haunted Detective Marcus Reed as he prepared for one of the most challenging aspects of the investigation. Interviewing minors who had witnessed their mother's murder and whose father stood accused of the crime required not only professional skill, but extraordinary sensitivity. The department brought in Dr. Amira Saleh, a child psychologist specializing in trauma, to assist with the interviews conducted at the county's Child Advocacy Center. Elias, the oldest at 14, demonstrated remarkable composure as cameras recorded his testimony. "Mum had been different the last few months," he explained, his fingers nervously tracing patterns on the table. "She started telling us stories about her parents and grandparents that she never mentioned before. Stories about people surviving terrible things in Europe during a war." When asked about the morning of the shooting, Elias revealed a crucial detail. "Dad came into our rooms very early and said we needed to come downstairs for a family meeting. He looked different, very calm, but his eyes were wrong." The boy paused, collecting himself. "When we got downstairs, Mum was in the kitchen making breakfast. She turned around and seemed surprised to see all of us. Dad told us to sit down because we needed to learn about betrayal." 12-year-old Layla's interview proved equally illuminating. More emotional than her brother, she frequently stopped to wipe away tears. "2 nights before it happened, I heard them fighting after they thought we were asleep. Dad was shouting about lies and deception. He kept saying, 15 years of lies, over and over. Mom was crying, saying she never meant to hurt anyone. She was just trying to find peace with herself." The youngest child, 9-year-old Adam, struggled most during questioning. His account, though fragmented, contained a pivotal detail the others hadn't mentioned. "Dad found Mom's special box," he said, "the one she kept locked in her closet. He was holding papers from it the night they had the big fight. This special box became the focus of renewed search efforts at the family home. Hidden behind a false panel in Rachel's closet, forensic technicians discovered a wooden box containing family photographs, documents in Hebrew, and several items of religious significance: a silver Star of David necklace, a small menorah, and a prayer book inscribed to Rachel Silverman from her grandmother on her bat mitzvah. Most significantly, the box contained Rachel's birth certificate showing her birth name, family photographs of her grandparents in pre-war Poland, and documentation of their internment at Auschwitz. A journal written in Rachel's grandmother's hand detailed the family's escape from Europe and their eventual settlement in Chicago, where they changed their surname from Silberstein to Silverman in an attempt to assimilate more easily into American society. A separate digital investigation yielded equally valuable evidence. Forensic analysis of Rachel's laptop revealed encrypted folders containing research on interfaith marriages and the psychological impact of hidden religious identity. Her browser history showed numerous visits to Jewish heritage websites and online forums for individuals returning to Judaism after leaving the faith. But the most damning evidence came from Nasir's devices. His phone contained screenshots of Rachel's private emails to her sister, apparently captured through the spyware he had installed. Text messages between Nasir and his cousin in Egypt expressed rage over Rachel's deception and discussed Islamic religious perspectives on marriage to non-believers. One message sent the week before the murder stated, "She has made fools of us all. Worse, she plans to poison the children's minds with her Jewish lies." Financial records painted a picture of premeditation. Beyond the $20,000 transfer to an overseas account, investigators discovered Nasir had updated his life insurance policy 2 weeks before the murder, removing Rachel as a beneficiary. He had also contacted a real estate attorney about the possibility of selling their home, specifically asking whether a spouse's signature could be waived under certain circumstances. As the investigation expanded, detectives interviewed members of the local mosque, where Nasir had been an active member. Most expressed shock, describing him as devout but moderate in his views. However, the imam provided concerning context. Mr. Kader came to me approximately 1 month before this tragedy, extremely agitated. He asked about Islamic teachings regarding marriages entered into under false pretenses. When I counseled patience and forgiveness, he became angry. He quoted extremely conservative interpretations that are not mainstream in our community. Nasir's workplace painted a similar picture of recent changes. His supervisor at the engineering firm noted that Nasir had requested a 3-month leave of absence just days before the murder, mentioning urgent family matters in Egypt that required his attention. Colleagues described him as increasingly withdrawn and irritable in the weeks leading up to the crime, a marked change from his typically professional demeanor. The investigation took an unexpected turn when detectives located the mutual friend whose text message had apparently alerted Nasir to Rachel's meeting with the rabbi. Samira Hassan, a professor at the same university as Rachel, admitted she had seen Rachel entering Temple Beth Shalom while driving past. I mentioned it casually to Nasir at a faculty event. I had no idea Rachel hadn't told him about reconnecting with her Jewish background. I thought they shared everything as a couple. This chance encounter had apparently triggered Nasir's suspicions, leading him to install the spyware that revealed the full extent of Rachel's planned return to Judaism. Phone records confirmed that immediately following this conversation with Samira, Nasir had called his parents in Cairo for a conversation lasting over 2 hours, the content of which remained unknown to investigators. The digital trail also led to troubling online activities. In the weeks before the murder, Nasir had visited numerous extremist websites promoting fundamentalist interpretations of religious texts, particularly focused on apostasy and interfaith marriage. He had downloaded articles from sources flagged by intelligence agencies for promoting religious violence. His search history included phrases like punishment for Jews who deceive Muslims and protecting children from Jewish influence. As the evidence mounted, prosecutor Vanessa Rodriguez prepared to present the case to a grand jury. This wasn't a crime of passion, she explained to Detective Reed during a case review. Every piece of evidence points to calculated planning. Nasir Kader discovered his wife's Jewish heritage, surveilled her for weeks, made financial preparations, and then executed her in front of their children as an object lesson. We're building a case for first-degree murder with hate crime enhancements. The defense team, led by prominent attorney James Sullivan, began constructing a narrative of cultural misunderstanding and extreme emotional distress. In preliminary hearings, Sullivan argued that Nasir had suffered a profound psychological break upon discovering his entire marriage was founded on deception. He signaled plans to pursue a diminished capacity defense, claiming Nasir had experienced a temporary psychotic break triggered by cultural and religious trauma. 6 weeks into the investigation, as the case prepared to move to trial, Detective Reed conducted a final interview with Rabbi Goldstein, hoping to better understand Rachel's journey back to her faith. What the rabbi shared would add yet another layer to the already complex case. Rachel contacted me initially not just about herself, but about her children, Goldstein explained. She had discovered something that deeply concerned her, something she felt they had a right to know. It wasn't just about reclaiming her Jewish identity. She believed there was a historical connection her children needed to understand, something that made her willing to risk everything to break her silence after 15 years. What this critical discovery might have been remained unclear, another piece in the puzzle of a family whose carefully constructed facade had shattered with fatal consequences. As the case prepared to move to court, the prosecution faced the challenge of exposing not just the facts of the crime itself, but the deep-seated prejudices and hidden truths that had made it possible. And somewhere in the evidence still being analyzed, investigators believed, lay the final trigger that had transformed Nasir from a controlling husband to a calculating killer. In the quiet confines of the Dearborn Police Department's evidence room, Detective Marcus Reed spread out the contents of Rachel Blackwood's special box once more. Something had been bothering him since his interview with Rabbi Goldstein. The mention of a historical connection. Rachel had discovered that was significant enough to risk her marriage and safety. The answer had to be here, among these fragments of a hidden life. Methodically, Reed reviewed each item again: the birth certificate, the family photographs, the religious artifacts, but it was a slim envelope tucked into the lining of the box that he had initially overlooked. Inside was a series of letters written in faded ink, correspondence between Rachel's grandmother, Sarah Silberstein, and a woman named Fatima Al-Rahman, dated 1947 to 1952. The letters, written in a combination of English and Arabic, revealed an extraordinary connection. Sarah Silberstein, after surviving Auschwitz, had been aided by an Egyptian family during her journey to Palestine before ultimately settling in America. The Al-Rahman family had hidden her in Cairo for several months when British authorities had prevented her ship from docking. The letters expressed profound gratitude and a deep friendship that transcended religious differences. Reed's heart raced as he read the final letter in the sequence. Fatima wrote of her newborn son, expressing hope that our families will remain connected across generations, proving that humanity stands above all divisions. The son's name was Khalid Al-Rahman, Nasir Khader's maternal grandfather. My God, Reed whispered to himself. Rachel discovered her family, and Nasir's had a historical connection. Their families had once saved each other. Digital forensics specialist Aisha Tambor confirmed Reed's suspicions when she recovered deleted searches from Rachel's laptop. In the months before her death, Rachel had been researching genealogical connections between Holocaust survivors and Egyptian families, particularly focusing on the name Al-Rahman. She had accessed historical archives documenting Jewish refugees who had passed through Egypt and had exchanged emails with a historian specializing in interfaith cooperation during World War II. Perhaps most telling was a draft email to her children, never sent, found in Rachel's documents folder. There's something beautiful I've discovered about our family history, both sides of our family. A story that shows how people from different faiths can save each other. When the time is right, I want you to understand that the divisions some people create are never as strong as our shared humanity. Armed with this new information, Reed secured a second interview with Nasir Khader at the county detention center where he awaited trial. The detective placed the letters on the table between them. Nasir's face drained of color as he recognized his grandfather's family name. "Did you know about this connection?" Reed asked. "That your grandfather's family saved Rachel's grandmother during the Holocaust? That your families had a history of interfaith cooperation?" Nasir's composure cracked momentarily. "She was going to use this to confuse the children," he said, his voice barely audible, "to make them think our families were meant to be together, to justify her lies." "So you did know?" Reed pressed. After a long pause, Nasir replied, "My mother told me stories about my grandfather's family helping Jews during the war. It was presented as a humanitarian act, not a personal connection. When Rachel showed me these letters 3 weeks before," his voice trailed off, "it was another manipulation. She had investigated my family without my knowledge, invaded our private history. This revelation shifted the timeline of events. Rachel had apparently shared her discovery with Nasir weeks before the murder, not days as previously thought. The knowledge had festered in him, alongside the revelation of her Jewish identity, creating a toxic combination of betrayal and rage." Further investigation into Nasir's background revealed another critical piece of context. His father, Ahmad Khader, had been a member of a conservative religious group in Egypt that had splintered from the Muslim Brotherhood, advocating strict separation between Muslims and other religious groups. Though Nasir had presented himself as moderate and westernized throughout his life in America, email correspondence with his father showed he maintained connections to these conservative ideologies. In one email sent shortly after Rachel revealed their family's historical connection, Nasir wrote to his father, "She believes this story somehow sanctifies her deception, that because her grandmother and our family crossed paths generations ago, it was acceptable for her to infiltrate our bloodline with her Jewish heritage. The children cannot be allowed to embrace this distorted view of history." The response from Ahmad Khader was chilling in its directness. "Some problems have only one solution. The children must be protected from this corruption of their faith and identity. Their souls depend on your strength as their father." This exchange occurred just 10 days before the murder, suggesting that Nasir's father had effectively endorsed drastic action. Prosecutors immediately added these emails to their growing case file, viewing them as evidence of both premeditation and the hate crime component of the charges. Meanwhile, interviews with Rachel's estranged family in Chicago painted a heartbreaking portrait of a woman caught between worlds. Her parents, Jacob and Ruth Silverman, described their daughter's gradual disconnection from her Jewish heritage after meeting Nasir in graduate school. At first, it seemed like youthful exploration, Jacob Silverman explained through tears. Rachel had always been intellectually curious about other cultures and religions. We worried when she started downplaying her Jewish upbringing, but we thought it was a phase. His voice broke as he added, "We never imagined she would completely erase that part of herself for a marriage." Ruth Silverman revealed that the family rift had occurred not because they opposed an interfaith marriage, but because Rachel had insisted they never mention her Jewish background to Nasir or his family. "She made us promise never to visit unless she arranged everything perfectly. We had to remove all Jewish items from our home when she brought him to visit. Eventually, it became too painful to maintain the charade, and we saw her less and less." The most poignant testimony came from Rachel's grandmother, Esther Silverman, now 97 and the only living link to the Holocaust survival story that connected the families. Though frail, her mind remained sharp as she recounted her daughter Sarah's journey and the kindness of the Al-Rahman family. "They saved her when no one else would help," Esther explained. "Sarah never forgot their kindness. She taught us that goodness exists in every faith." With trembling hands, she held a photograph of her granddaughter. Rachel was searching for that connection again, the proof that divisions between people can be healed. How cruel that this same story led to her death. Forensic psychologist Dr. Jamil Farouk, assigned to evaluate Nasir's mental state, provided crucial insight into the psychological factors at play. "Mr. Kader exhibits a phenomenon we sometimes call compartmentalized identity," he explained to the prosecution team. He successfully presented himself as a moderate, westernized individual in professional and some social contexts, while privately maintaining much more conservative religious and cultural beliefs. This compartmentalization extended to his view of Rachel. In his clinical interviews, Nasir repeatedly referred to her as having committed cultural treason by concealing her Jewish background. More disturbing was his apparent lack of remorse. He views the murder as a necessary action to protect his children from religious contamination, Dr. Farouk noted. The discovery that his own family had once aided Jews, far from softening his perspective, exacerbated his sense of betrayal. He perceived it as Rachel, manipulating even his family history to justify her deception. As the investigation neared completion, one final piece of evidence emerged from an unexpected source. Layla, the couple's middle child, had been working with her therapist through art therapy. Among her drawings was a detailed scene of her parents arguing, with speech bubbles containing a critical revelation. In her childlike writing, she had quoted her father saying, "First you hide being Jewish, then you find this connection to turn my children against their faith. I would rather die than see my children become Jews." This drawing, dated 1 week before the murder, provided not only additional evidence of premeditation, but a clear statement of the religious hatred motivating the crime. Prosecutor Rodriguez immediately filed to have the drawing admitted as evidence, while the defense countered that children's recollections were unreliable and potentially influenced by therapy. As the 4-month investigation concluded, the full timeline of events had finally emerged. Rachel Blackwood, born Rachel Silverman, had hidden her Jewish identity to marry Nasir Kader. After 15 years of suppressing her heritage, she had begun reconnecting with her faith and family. Her discovery of the historical connection between their families, that Nasir's grandfather's family had saved her grandmother during the Holocaust, had prompted her to reveal both her true identity and this shared history to Nasir, hoping it would ease his acceptance of her return to Judaism. Instead, this revelation had triggered a lethal combination of perceived betrayal and religious hatred in Nasir. After consulting with his conservative father and making methodical preparations, he had executed Rachel in front of their children as both punishment for her deception and to prevent her from influencing the children with her Jewish heritage. With the investigation complete, all evidence catalogued and witnesses prepared, the case of Michigan Verster, Nasir Kader was ready for trial. As Detective Reed filed his final report, he reflected on the tragic irony at the heart of the case, a story of interfaith cooperation and humanity that should have brought healing had instead triggered violence born of the very prejudices it sought to overcome. The Wayne County Circuit Court fell silent as prosecutor Vanessa Rodriguez approached the jury box. Her opening statement in Michigan versus Nasir Kader would set the tone for what many legal observers already predicted would be one of the most significant hate crime prosecutions in the state's history. This case, Rodriguez began, her voice measured but resolute, is about a man who executed his wife for the crime of being Jewish, not in Nazi Germany in the 1940s, but in Michigan in 2022. She paused, allowing the weight of her words to settle over the courtroom. The evidence will show that Nasir Khader methodically planned the murder of Rachel Blackwood after discovering she was Jewish and intended to reconnect with her heritage. He shot her 3 times in the chest after forcing their children to watch, to teach them a lesson about what happens to traitors who embrace Judaism. September 12, 2022, marked the beginning of a trial expected to last 3 weeks. The prosecution had assembled overwhelming evidence of premeditation and religious hatred as the primary motive. The defense, led by attorney James Sullivan, faced the daunting task of countering this narrative without appearing to justify an act of violence that had horrified the community. Sullivan's opening statement focused on what he termed profound cultural misunderstanding and betrayal. Avoiding direct references to Rachel's religion, he instead emphasized the 15-year deception that destroyed the foundation of trust in the Khader marriage. He characterized Nasir as a man who had experienced extreme emotional distress upon discovering his entire family life had been built on fundamental lies, and suggested that temporary insanity, not hatred, had driven his actions. The prosecution's case began with forensic evidence establishing the timeline of the shooting. Medical examiner Dr. Sophia Chen testified that the pattern of gunshot wounds indicated Rachel had been facing her killer, with no defensive wounds present. The victim appears to have been standing still when shot, Dr. Chen explained. The trajectory of the bullets suggests she was not running or attempting to shield herself. Digital forensic specialist Aisha Tambor walked the jury through the evidence recovered from the family's devices, projecting Nasir's damning internet searches onto screens visible to the entire courtroom. His progression from researching interfaith marriage dissolution to punishment for Jews who deceive Muslims painted a disturbing picture of escalating radicalization. Tambor also presented the spyware Nasir had installed to monitor Rachel's communications, demonstrating his methodical surveillance of his wife in the weeks before her death. Financial investigator Michael Dawson testified to Nasir's careful preparation, highlighting the overseas money transfers, life insurance changes, and inquiries about property sales that suggested he was planning not just Rachel's murder, but his potential escape afterward. These are not the actions of someone in the grip of temporary insanity, Rodriguez emphasized during redirection. These are calculated moves by someone preparing to commit a crime. The courtroom grew tense when Rodriguez called Samira Hassan to testify about the conversation that had triggered Nasir's discovery of Rachel's meetings at Temple Beth Shalom. Hassan appeared visibly distressed as she recounted mentioning to Nasir that she had seen Rachel entering the synagogue. He became very still, she recalled. He asked me to repeat exactly what I had seen, what day, what time. I thought nothing of it, I assumed he knew, when I realized later that I had unknowingly set these events in motion. Her voice broke, unable to complete the sentence. On cross-examination, Sullivan pressed Hassan about Rachel's pattern of secrecy, attempting to establish that her behavior had been unusual enough to cause concern among colleagues. The strategy backfired when Hassan responded, "The only unusual thing was how careful Rachel always was about keeping her personal life private. Now I understand why. She was afraid of exactly what ended up happening." The prosecution's case grew stronger with testimony from Rabbi David Goldstein, who described Rachel's cautious steps toward reclaiming her Jewish identity. She expressed concern for her safety, Goldstein testified. She asked specifically about resources for women leaving controlling relationships with religious complications. He also confirmed her excitement about the historical connection between the families, stating, "Rachel saw this as a sign that reconciliation was possible, that her children could embrace both sides of their heritage without conflict." When the trial entered its second week, the courtroom was cleared of spectators and media for the most sensitive testimony, the children's accounts of witnessing their mother's murder. Due to their age and trauma, the children testified via closed-circuit television from a separate room, with only the judge, jury, and essential court personnel present for the live feed. 14-year-old Elias spoke with remarkable clarity about the morning of March 12th. "Dad woke us up early and said we needed to come downstairs for an important family meeting. He looked different, very calm, but his eyes were." The boy paused, empty. "When Mom saw us all standing there, she looked confused. Dad told us to sit down because we needed to learn about loyalty and betrayal. Elias described how his father had produced the letters connecting their families' histories. He threw them on the table and told Mom, "Even my family history wasn't safe from your manipulation." Mom tried to explain that she'd found something beautiful that connected us, something that proved people from different faiths could save each other. His voice faltered as he continued. Dad pulled out the gun and said, "This is what happens when someone tries to destroy our faith." Mom looked at us and said, "I love you. Remember that people can choose compassion." Then he shot her. 12-year-old Layla corroborated her brother's account, adding that in the week before the murder, she had overheard multiple arguments about religion. Dad kept saying we were Muslims and that Mom was trying to confuse us. Mom said we could understand both sides of our heritage. Her voice small but clear, she described the shooting itself. Mom didn't try to run, she just looked sad, like she'd been expecting something bad to happen for a long time. 9-year-old Adam's testimony was brief, but devastating. When asked what he remembered most clearly, he replied, Dad said, "Watch carefully. This is what happens to Jews who try to corrupt Muslim children." Then he shot Mom and she fell down and there was blood everywhere. The boy's voice broke as he added, "I didn't know Mom was Jewish. I didn't know what that word meant until Dad killed her for it." The prosecution rested after presenting the emails between Nasir and his father in Egypt, with particular emphasis on Ahmad Kada's statement that some problems have only one solution, and his exhortation that Nasir's actions would protect the children's souls. Rodriguez argued that these communications demonstrated not only premeditation, but the explicit religious hatred motivating the crime. The defense case opened with testimony from cultural anthropologist Dr. Eleanor Marsh, who spoke about the centrality of religious identity in traditional Middle Eastern cultures. Without directly justifying Nasir's actions, Dr. Marsh attempted to contextualize his sense of betrayal within a cultural framework where religious identity is considered fundamental rather than personal. On cross-examination, Rodriguez quickly established that Dr. Marsh's academic perspective offered no explanation for premeditated murder as a response to religious differences. Sullivan called several character witnesses from the local Muslim community who testified to Nasir's previously moderate religious practices and involvement in community service. Each witness expressed shock at the crime, describing it as completely out of character for the man they had known, yet their testimony inadvertently reinforced the prosecution's argument about Nasir's compartmentalized identity, the carefully maintained public persona that masked more extreme private beliefs. The defense suffered a significant setback when their expert witness on temporary insanity, Dr. Gregory Walsh, was forced to concede under cross-examination that Nasir's methodical preparations, including financial transactions and weapon practice, were inconsistent with an impulsive act triggered by temporary psychosis. When Rodriguez pressed him on whether hatred of Jews could be classified as temporary insanity, Dr. Walsh uncomfortably acknowledged that religious prejudice, no matter how extreme, is not recognized as a psychotic disorder. As the trial entered its third week, speculation grew about whether Nasir Kada would testify in his own defense. Legal experts debated the strategy on cable news, with most agreeing that putting him on the stand would be risky given the overwhelming evidence of premeditation and the potential for damaging admissions under cross-examination. On the trial's 15th day, Sullivan announced that Nasir would indeed testify. A murmur ran through the courtroom as he took the stand, appearing thin but composed in a conservative suit, his expression impassive as he was sworn in. Under direct examination, Nasir spoke quietly about his upbringing in Cairo, his education in America, and his initial attraction to Rachel's intelligence and interest in Middle Eastern culture. He described their life together as harmonious until recent years, claiming that Rachel had begun changing after the birth of their youngest child. She became secretive, distant. I sensed she was hiding something fundamental from me. When Sullivan asked about his discovery of Rachel's Jewish identity, Nasir's composed facade briefly cracked. 15 years of lies, he said, echoing the phrase witnesses had heard him repeat before the murder. Everything I believed about our marriage was false. She had entered our union under false pretenses, knowing that I would never have married her had I known the truth. Sullivan carefully guided him through the weeks leading up to the shooting, allowing Nasir to present his version, that he had been in a state of psychological distress, unable to eat or sleep properly, consumed by the revelation that the mother of my children had hidden her true identity, and was planning to confuse them about their faith and heritage. When asked directly about the morning of the shooting, Nasir claimed his memories were fragmented and unclear. He admitted to calling the family meeting but stated, "I remember wanting to confront Rachel about her deception in front of the children, to make them understand the gravity of her betrayal. After that, there is darkness. I remember the gun in my hand and Rachel on the floor, but nothing in between." Rodriguez's cross-examination was methodical and devastating. She walked Nasir through each preparatory step he had taken: the spyware installation, the financial transfers, the weapon practice, the consultations with his father. For each action, she asked, "Is this consistent with someone experiencing memory fragmentation?" For each damning search query about punishing Jews, she asked, "Did you type this during one of your moments of darkness?" The most damaging exchange came when Rodriguez presented Layla's drawing with its quoted statement, "I would rather die than see my children become Jews." "Did you say these words, Mr. Kader?" Rodriguez asked. After a long silence, Nasir replied, "If my daughter remembers me saying this, I must have said it. And did you mean it?" Another pause. "Yes. So much that you were willing to murder their mother in front of them." Sullivan's objection was overruled. Nasir looked directly at the jury for the first time. "You cannot understand. In my culture, in my faith, this was the ultimate betrayal. To be Jewish?" Rodriguez pressed. "To lie about being Jewish? To marry a Muslim man under false pretenses? To plan to corrupt our children with confusion about their faith? So yes," Rodriguez concluded, "you killed Rachel Blackwood because she was Jewish and wanted her children to know about their Jewish heritage. That's why you made them watch, isn't it? As a warning about what happens to Jews in your household." Sullivan's objection came too late. Nasir's response, "They needed to understand the consequences of betrayal," had already registered with the jury. As closing arguments approached, the prosecution had established beyond reasonable doubt that Nasir Kader had committed premeditated murder, motivated by religious hatred. The defense had abandoned its temporary insanity approach in favor of arguing for second-degree murder, suggesting that while Nasir had intentionally killed Rachel, the act was the result of extreme emotional distress, rather than calculated planning. In her closing argument, Rodriguez methodically reviewed the evidence of premeditation and the explicit religious hatred documented in Nasir's own words and actions. She ended by holding up the photograph of Rachel Blackwood found in her grandmother's possession. Rachel Blackwood died because she dared to reclaim her Jewish identity after 15 years of hiding it in fear, Rodriguez told the jury. She died because she discovered a beautiful historical connection between her family and her husband's, that Nasir's grandfather's family had once saved her grandmother during the Holocaust, and believed this shared history might help her children bridge two faiths. Instead, it triggered the very hatred it should have healed. Justice demands that her murder be recognized for what it was: a premeditated act of religious hatred, planned and executed with cold deliberation. Sullivan's closing argument emphasized cultural context and emotional distress, urging the jury to consider the profound psychological impact of discovering one's entire marriage was founded on deception. He carefully avoided explicitly justifying the murder, instead arguing that the circumstances warranted a lesser charge than first-degree murder with hate crime enhancements. After 5 days of deliberation, the jury returned to the courtroom on October 7, 2022. The foreman, a retired high school principal, stood to deliver their verdict. Guilty of first-degree murder with hate crime enhancements on all counts, the conviction carried a mandatory sentence of life imprisonment without possibility of parole. As Nasir Kader was led from the courtroom, his expression remained impassive. In the gallery, Rachel's parents embraced, their faces reflecting not triumph, but the devastating weight of justice that could never restore their daughter's life. And in a foster home across town, 3 children continued the long process of healing from witnessing a tragedy born of hatred disguised as faith, a process that would extend far beyond the conclusion of legal proceedings. On a crisp November morning in 2022, the Wayne County Circuit Court filled to capacity for the sentencing of Nasir Kader. Though the verdict had guaranteed a life sentence without parole, the sentencing hearing would provide an opportunity for impact statements from those affected by Rachel Blackwood's murder, and for Judge Evelyn Mercer to formally deliver the sentence with her final assessment of the case. The atmosphere in the courtroom was solemn as Jacob and Ruth Silverman approached the podium to deliver their victim impact statement. Ruth, supported by her husband's steady hand, spoke with quiet dignity about the daughter they had gradually lost twice, first to her marriage and then to murder. Rachel was brilliant, compassionate, and caught between worlds, Ruth said, her voice steady despite her grief. She believed love could bridge differences of faith and culture. For years, she buried her identity to preserve that dream. When she finally found the courage to reclaim her heritage, it cost her life. She paused, looking directly at Nasir. The greatest tragedy is that she discovered something beautiful, that your grandfather's family once saved her grandmother from the Holocaust. She thought this shared history would help you accept her truth. Instead, it fueled your hatred. Esther Silverman, Rachel's 97-year-old grandmother, had been deemed too frail to attend the sentencing in person. Instead, her statement was read by the prosecutor. "I survived Auschwitz only because strangers from another faith saw my humanity above my religion. The Al-Rahman family risked everything to shelter me in Cairo when no one else would help. How painful that their descendant could not show the same compassion to my granddaughter." Rachel died because she believed in the same connection between people that once saved my life. The most powerful statement came from Elias Kader Blackwood, who at 14 had requested to address the court. Against the advice of his therapists, but with the support of his foster parents, he stood before the judge, his composure remarkable for someone so young and so traumatized. "My mother taught us that every person contains many identities," he began, his voice initially quiet but growing stronger. "She used to tell us stories about people from different backgrounds finding common ground. I never understood why those stories made her cry sometimes." He looked briefly toward his father before continuing. "Now I know she was talking about herself, about the parts of her she wasn't allowed to share with us." Elias spoke about the aftermath of witnessing his mother's murder. "Layla still has nightmares. Adam barely speaks. I keep thinking about what Mom said right before Dad shot her, that we should remember people can choose compassion. I'm trying to remember that even though it's hard." His voice broke slightly. "I want the court to know that my mother was killed for trying to be whole, for wanting her children to know all of who they are. That shouldn't be a reason for anyone to die." Defense attorney Sullivan presented several letters from Nasir's family in Egypt, expressing shock at the crime and extending condolences to Rachel's family. These gestures rang hollow against the evidence presented at trial, particularly the emails from Nasir's father that had effectively endorsed violence. More substantive was Sullivan's argument for considering Nasir's cultural background as a mitigating factor in how his sentence would be served, requesting placement in a facility with appropriate religious accommodations. When offered the opportunity to address the court, Nasir Kader rose slowly. His statement, delivered in a detached tone, offered no apology to Rachel's family or his children. Instead, he spoke of feeling betrayed by American society, claiming his actions had been mischaracterized by a legal system that failed to understand the fundamental nature of religious identity in my culture. His only expression of regret was directed toward his children, whom he described as victims of their mother's deception and now deprived of both parents. Judge Mercer, known for her measured demeanor, listened to all statements without interruption. When all had spoken, she delivered her sentencing remarks with careful deliberation. "Mr. Kader, this court has heard extensive testimony and evidence regarding your actions," she began. "The jury has found you guilty of first-degree murder with hate crime enhancements, having determined that you methodically planned and executed the murder of Rachel Blackwood because of her Jewish identity and her desire to share that heritage with your children." The judge continued, "I have considered the defense's arguments regarding cultural context. Let me be absolutely clear. No cultural or religious background justifies premeditated murder. The United States legal system recognizes and protects religious freedom for all citizens. What it does not protect is religious hatred that leads to violence." With unwavering clarity, Judge Mercer addressed the particularly disturbing elements of the case. "You chose to commit this murder in front of your children, by your own admission, to teach them about consequences of betrayal. This court finds that decision represents an additional layer of cruelty that has caused profound psychological harm to 3 innocent young people." She then formally sentenced Nasir Kader to life imprisonment without the possibility of parole, with the additional recommendation that he receive psychological evaluation and appropriate counseling to address the religious hatred that motivated this crime. As Nasir was led from the courtroom for the final time, the legal chapter of the case closed. But for many involved, the repercussions were just beginning. In the months following the sentencing, the case generated significant discussion about interfaith marriages, hidden identities, and religious extremism in America. Legal scholars noted the significance of the hate crime enhancements in a case involving domestic violence, creating precedent for recognizing when intimate partner violence is motivated by religious or ethnic hatred rather than solely interpersonal dynamics. The fate of the Keda Blackwood children became a subject of particular concern. Initially placed in emergency foster care, they faced complex questions of cultural and religious identity. Both the Silverman family in Chicago and Nasir's brother Tariq Khadr, who had immigrated to Boston years earlier, petitioned for custody. In February 2023, family court judge Sandra Martinez awarded primary custody to Jacob and Ruth Silverman, with significant visitation rights for Tariq Khadr, who had publicly denounced his brother's actions and expressed commitment to supporting the children's understanding of both sides of their heritage. The custody arrangement explicitly included provisions for the children to learn about both their Jewish and Muslim backgrounds, with professional support to help them navigate their complex identity. The decision represented a practical implementation of what Rachel had hoped to achieve in life, allowing her children to embrace their full heritage without being forced to choose sides or deny any part of themselves. Judge Martinez emphasized that the arrangement was designed to honor the interconnected history of these families and provide these children with the opportunity to heal through understanding rather than division. The community impact extended beyond the immediate families. The Dearborn Islamic Center, where Nasir had prayed, established an interfaith dialogue program in partnership with Temple Beth Shalom, explicitly referencing the historical connection between the Al-Rahman and Silberstein families as inspiration. Rabbi Goldstein and Imam Hassan Farouk co-led discussions about religious tolerance and the dangers of extremism, often sharing the story of how Egyptian Muslims had saved Polish Jews during the Holocaust as an example of humanity transcending religious boundaries. Wayne State University, where Rachel had taught, created a memorial scholarship in her name for students pursuing studies in interfaith relations and cultural understanding. The first recipient was a young woman from a mixed Jewish-Muslim family who planned to work in conflict resolution. Perhaps the most meaningful development came from unexpected quarters. In April 2023, Ahmad Khadr, Nasir's father, whose emails had encouraged his son's actions, traveled from Egypt to meet privately with the Silverman family. Though the content of their conversation remained confidential, Jacob Silverman later described it as a difficult but necessary step toward healing. Following this meeting, Ahmad Khadr publicly released the full correspondence between his mother Fatima and Sarah Silberstein, making these historical documents of interfaith cooperation available to scholars and the public. For Detective Marcus Reed, the case remained personally significant long after its official conclusion. In May 2023, he was invited to speak at a law enforcement conference about investigating hate crimes within domestic violence contexts. His presentation emphasized the importance of recognizing when religious or ethnic hatred motivates what might otherwise be categorized simply as family violence. Rachel Blackwood's murder forces us to confront uncomfortable truths about how hatred can hide within intimate relationships, Reed told his colleagues. She died because she dared to reclaim an identity she had hidden out of fear that proved tragically justified. Our responsibility as law enforcement is to create a society where no one needs to hide their heritage to feel safe in their own home. The most profound changes, however, occurred in the lives of the 3 children who had witnessed their mother's murder. Through extensive therapy and the support of both sides of their extended family, they slowly began to rebuild their lives. Elias, the oldest, emerged as a thoughtful advocate for interfaith understanding, speaking at his high school about his experience despite his young age. Layla discovered artistic talents that allowed her to process her trauma through creativity. Adam, the youngest and initially the most withdrawn after the tragedy, gradually regained his voice through music therapy. On the first anniversary of Rachel's death, the children participated in a private memorial service that incorporated both Jewish and Muslim prayers, symbolically achieving the integration their mother had sought in life. As Ruth Silverman later wrote in a community newspaper essay, Rachel believed that understanding our complete history, even its painful chapters, was essential to building a more compassionate future. Through her children, that belief lives on. The historical connection between the families, that Nasir's grandfather's family had once saved Rachel's grandmother during the Holocaust, became widely known through media coverage of the trial. Historians and interfaith activists cited it as a powerful example of how human compassion can transcend religious boundaries, even as the tragedy demonstrated how quickly such bridges can be destroyed by hatred and extremism. In October 2023, nearly a year after the conclusion of the trial, an unexpected document emerged during the ongoing organization of Rachel's academic papers. Among her research notes was a draft article titled "Forgotten Heroes: Muslim Families Who Saved Jews During the Holocaust." The piece detailed multiple instances of interfaith cooperation during humanity's darkest hour, including the story of the Al-Rahman family sheltering Sarah Silberstein. Rachel had written in the margin, "Our children need to know that hatred is a choice, not an inheritance. The same blood that flowed in the veins of those who saved lives flows in Nasir's veins. The same blood that flowed in those who survived against all odds flows in mine. Our children carry both legacies of courage." This posthumously discovered writing became the foundation for an educational curriculum about interfaith cooperation during historical crises, developed by a coalition of religious leaders in Michigan and eventually adopted by schools across the state. The program explicitly addressed how stories of past cooperation can either heal present divisions or, when rejected, deepen them. As for Nasir Khadr, he remained imprisoned at the Chippewa Correctional Facility in Michigan's Upper Peninsula, his appeals systematically rejected by higher courts. Prison records indicated he initially refused psychological counseling and maintained that his actions had been justified. Whether time and reflection would ever lead him to recognize the tragedy of his choice, rejecting a history of compassion in favor of hatred, remained unknown. The case of Michigan Verster. Nasir Khadr eventually became required study in law schools nationwide, not only for its legal significance in establishing religious hatred as an enhancement in domestic violence prosecutions, but for the complex questions it raised about identity, assimilation, and the consequences of forcing others to deny fundamental aspects of themselves. In the end, the story of Rachel Blackwood's life and death transcended the boundaries of a single criminal case. It became a powerful reminder that the choice between hatred and compassion repeats itself in every generation, and that the consequences of that choice can echo through families for decades to come. In that sense, the historical connection she had discovered between her grandmother and Nasir's grandfather remained profoundly relevant, not as the reconciliation she had hoped for, but as an enduring question about the paths we choose when confronted with difference. As Elias Khadr Blackwood, wise beyond his years, observed on the second anniversary of his mother's death, the same family that once chose to save lives later produced someone who chose to take a life. The difference wasn't in their blood or their faith, it was in the choice they made about how to see people who were different from themselves. That's what Mom wanted us to understand. That's her legacy.